Cyberwork and Infosec would like to introduce you to our new Cybersecurity Beginner Immersive Boot Camps. They're designed to help you gain and enhance your expertise in the cybersecurity field. Join our live interactive virtual classes led by Infosec's highly skilled instructors who will guide you through the material and provide real-time support. And as part of Infosec's immersive training, each student will have access to career coaching aimed at helping them start or switch to the cybersecurity field. You heard that right. We aren't here to just teach you the concept of what a security professional does. We want to prepare you to enter the job market with a competitive edge in 6 months' time. Now, I've told you about Infosec certification boot camps, and if you're trying to hit your next career target and need a certification to do it, that's still your best bet. But if you're an entry-level cybersecurity professional or want to be, or you're switching your career and want to experience a career transformation, Infosec's immersive boot camps are designed to make you job ready in 6 months. To learn more, go to infosecinstitute.com/cyberwork, all one word, CYBERWRK, and learn more about this exciting new way to immerse yourself in learning with Infosec. Now, let's begin the show. Today on Cyberwork, I'm very excited to welcome Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva herself, to discuss data privacy. Now, Debbie developed a love of learning about data privacy ever since working in library science, and she took it through to legal technologies and now runs her own data privacy consultancy and hosts the long-running podcast, the Data Diva Talks Privacy Podcast. We talk about data privacy in all its complex, nerdy, and sometimes frustrating permutations, how GDPR helped bring Debbie to even greater attention, how AI has added even more layers of complexity to this puzzle, and Debbie gives some great advice for listeners ready to dip their toes into the waters of a data privacy practitioner career. That's all today on Cyberwork. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork Podcast. My guests are a cross-section of cybersecurity industry thought leaders, and our goal is to help you learn about cybersecurity trends and how those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, and leave you with some tips and advice for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. My guest today, I'm very excited about this, is Debbie Reynolds. She's known as the Data Diva. She's a leading expert in data privacy and emerging technology. With over 20 years in ad tech, fintech, legal tech, and AI, she delves into smart cities, IoT, and data privacy. She's a sought-after keynote speaker, and Debbie has addressed companies like Coca-Cola, PayPal, and Uber. Her insights appear in the New York Times and Wired, and she is also the host of the #1 podcast, the Data Diva Talks Privacy Podcast, which I love. I've listened to about half dozen episodes already, and I highly recommend it. She's recognized globally as a top data privacy expert as well. Her leadership roles include the U.S. Department of Commerce's IoT Advisory Board membership and the chair of the IEEE Committee on Cybersecurity for Human Centricity, which is influencing the future of data privacy and emerging technology. So no guesses in terms of what we're going to be talking about today. It's going to be data privacy all the way, but I'm looking forward to learning more about Debbie and her journey and how she got here. So Debbie, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to Cyberwork.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, like I said, I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, and I'm even as someone who's not completely steeped in data privacy myself, it seems like I get at least one really cool insight in every episode. So yeah, I really appreciate it. So yeah, Debbie, to help our listeners get to know you a little better, where did you first get interested in like computers and technology and security and privacy? Was there an initial spark? Was there a moment when you said, this is what I want to do with my life, or what got you excited about it?
Yeah, well, it is quite a pernicious journey. It wasn't a straight line, I would say. I was actually a philosophy major in college. I thought I was going to actually become a lawyer. And my mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was in my senior year of college. And so I decided I need to do something where I can spend more time with her. So I started doing, back then it's called desktop publishing. Like now it's like graphic design and different things like that. And I had a friend that had another friend that was, a head of a university library, and they wanted to create databases of books. And so they asked me to help out, and I did, and I fell in love with data. So that was kind of the beginning of my data journey. So this was back in the day when libraries had card catalogs, and they were trying to create databases of books. And, you've seen how rapidly and differently, library science is now as it was back then. But then during that time, also, I read a book called The Right to Privacy, and Caroline Kennedy was a co-author of that book. And the book shocked me, actually. It was a book that my mother had, and she was very interested in it. And her interest made me interested in it. And it was all about what's private and what isn't in the US. And I was, very shocked, because I think in the US, we think, we're the land of the free, the home of the brave. But we don't know that privacy is not like a constitutional right. And that book talks about those legal, areas, those gray areas where people's privacy, may be taken advantage of. So that was around the time of just, like the early internet, right?
Yeah,
like 1995. And so as I worked more and started getting more in depth into technology, and more stuff started getting into digital systems, I started to see, the problems with putting people's personal data in these systems, and how the data was shared and different things like that. And so as I was doing this work, I was working a lot with multinational companies that were doing data moves and data transfers around the world. And in order to do that, you have to know like the laws for different jurisdictions. And back then, that wasn't even a job, right? It was just something you just had to know. But as the European Union started to re-examine their data protection regulations, I started getting calls from companies that knew me, and they started asking me, hey, can you come talk to me about privacy? And so one of the first big companies that asked me to come talk to them was McDonald's Corporation. So I went to their corporate legal department and talked to all their legal folks around the world around privacy. And this is before the big change in the General Data Protection Regulation came into play in Europe. And I was like, hey, even though this is in Europe, this is going to be a huge, big deal. And this is why it is. And this is how it's going to change, your work. And it actually did. And so like nobody in the US talked about that around that time, right? This is before it came out. And then I just kept talking about, hey, this is important. I felt like I was like Paul Revere, like, oh, the British are coming. I was telling people, hey, you need to pay attention. And eventually, by the time the regulation went into full effect, I got a call from PBS, and they asked me to be on TV talk about general data protection regulation. And it's funny because people still contact me about that interview. So I made some predictions that actually came true. It's pretty funny. But yeah. So that's what I decided, well, maybe I should just do privacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I started doing that.
I love that. So it sounds like the sort of the roots of the Data Diva experience came from GDPR happening, and a lot of people not in Europe or companies that were partly in Europe and partly in the US were like, help us understand what the heck's going on here. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's fortuitous. I'm like, it's so funny because the GDPR went into full effect in May 25th of 2018. That's when I was on PBS. But 2 years before that, the law was passed. And I thought, the day that it passed, it became a law, quote unquote, but not enforceable. I thought, okay, I'm gonna wake up and today everybody's gonna care about data protection. And like there was nothing on the news, there was nothing, like nobody cared, right? So I thought, oh God. So I thought, well, I just need to talk about this a lot. And there even weren't things written about it, right? Because when I was telling people about it, people were like, oh, well, can you give me a summary? I'm like, there is no summary, So I started doing like writing a lot in that time period about it, just so that there'll be some information that people can look back on.
Yeah. I remember that era, and it's funny. Yeah. Laws don't really become laws until they become enforceable. And I know that on your show you talk about if you give your guests one wish, or king for a day, queen for a day, whatever, in terms of making changes. And I over here talk about having a magic gavel and stuff. So we'll talk later about what kind of enforceable things that we want to get into with regarding to data privacy. But to start with here, I want to talk a little more about your career. So I like to look around. I guess maybe this is an invasion of privacy, but I look at your LinkedIn profile, your experiences, to get a sense of what your history is like, and it gives me a sense of your employment story and your cyber history and stuff like that. So I mean, you've done a lot of stuff you told us a little bit about that in terms of library science and so forth, but you spent a good portion of your earlier career working in law and specifically legal technology. And I've had one other guest on who's a law cyber person on the show in the past. And I think it's not a common path, but it's an interesting one. So could you talk about how a pivot like this from the legal tech area, I guess that was probably privacy related too, but like, how did that sort of turn into this complete world of data privacy?
Yeah. Well, I think people misunderstand that part of my history.
Okay.
I've always been a data person, and I've always done consulting around data projects, but I have had situations where I've worked with companies that were involved in legal stuff, but that was not the whole enchilada of what I worked on, right? So, I was still working, I'm still working like in ad tech. People just call me up. I've been very fortunate that people have called me up with all types of wacky things that they want to do with data. And so I've been able to, for me, I think if people see, oh, well, she's done some stuff in legal tech, it's like, but I was never always in legal tech. Like I was in all these other types of tech spaces. But for me, to me, that's the reason why my work is so unique, because I traverse all these different industries. I think people just didn't know that I knew all, people in business intelligence, people in ad tech, people in, pharma, all this other type of stuff, just because, when you think of legal, a lot of legal issues around data is around litigation. And so companies have bigger data problems than litigation. And so I work with them on all those different things. So before litigation, people need to have better governance of everything, within their corporation. And a lot of my talking with people over the years about privacy is about how much bigger it is than any one industry.
Yeah. Now, I want to sort of break apart how you acquired this sort of tool belt of private, because I know it sounds like you learned as needed on the job and so forth. But for a lot of our listeners, they're trying to figure out, where their opportunity is going to come from. And one of our past guests, Chris Stevens, is our Infosec skills author for privacy and sort of privacy certifications. The 7 of them or whatever. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the combination of how you sort of like came to learn like the different privacy regulation structures around the world, the governance. How did you sort of put all that together? I mean, I know it was kind of on the job and as you were going, but like what are the different pieces of this toolbox that sort of add up to the whole?
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't on the job. Privacy is my own personal interest. So these were things that I was interested in back then. As I said, when I read that book in 1995, I just kept seeing just in general how more data was being created, more data was being collected, seeing kind of the gaps. And that's what I talk a lot about on my show. So I talk about the gaps in privacy, the gaps in regulation, how data plays within data spaces. And so what happened is my personal interests converged with my professional life. So, like I see things like people say, well, let's put chips in pets. And I thought, oh, this is bad because people are going to put chips in people at some point, right? And so for me, I didn't ever think that my personal interest in privacy would turn into a business, but it did. So because people will start saying, well, we want to do this. I'm like, well, like an example, let's say someone said, okay, we have some data in France and we want to transfer it via FTP over to the US. And I'm like, well, you can't do that.
Yeah. Right.
And they're like, well, why? I'm like, because they have, this type of data can't be transferred because of, these blocking statutes. And those are things, that was not something it was not a job requirement or anything. That was what I brought, my knowledge that I had, just because that's something that interests me. So for me, it's just been many years of reading, researching, because I guess I'm personally interested in privacy. I want, what are people doing with my data? So I think I think my motivation for being interested in privacy is personal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what are you doing? And so I when I had a chance to get involved, whether it was, this IoT advisory board, I raised my hand. I said, hey, I want to, change, how can I use my skills to change the way that things are happening in the world? And so that's what I decided. I'm like, well, I can go in any direction, right? I could take off a career like a coach and move into any type of data space because I've built data systems for over 30 years.
Can you talk about building data systems? Like what does that process look like on sort of a practical day-to-day level?
Yeah. So I guess my early career in library science, literally creating the technology that's capturing particular data types, whether that be text or, barcodes or different things that people are using around that. Eventually, technology got to a place where people wanted more descriptive information around data that was put in. Because, when you think of like libraries or card catalogs, it basically would tell you, here's a book and here where it is, and here's the title. Eventually people want to know more, right? So what's the description of the book? What's in the book? What books, cross-reference the same information. So I think, my background in that really helped me, especially as other companies were coming to the challenge where they couldn't manage the data that they had manually, right? So there are just not enough paper. There are not enough people, right? As we see more digitization, especially with the commercial internet, where people were, Microsoft Office, different things like that. People were authoring things more rapidly. There's more data in different forms. It was just difficult to be able to try to manage. I think if it were not for the internet, we still be in a very paper world, right? But especially we're seeing this escalation again with artificial intelligence, where there's going to be even more data created, right? And so the types
even
of
harder
traditional
to sort of source where it's coming from with AI, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So it's creating more data challenges that we're having just because the volume and the speed in which this data is being collected. So for me, it was like, okay, so we don't have the right tool. Well, let's build it. Let's build a new tool, or let's go. Is another industry using a tool in a different way that we can learn from. So it's kind of a race to try to keep up with the demands of what people really want and what those technologies end up being.
Yeah. Now, like I said, I really enjoy the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast here, and I encourage our listeners to go check it out and check out some episodes. It obviously comes from a place of real passion for you. Like you said here, you got into data privacy because you have this very vested interest in understanding what our data is being used for. And each episode, it feels like, you're asking the guest, what is the thing, what is the data privacy issue that you're most worried about right now? So I'll turn the question back to you, Debbie. What is the number one data privacy issue for you at the moment? What's the thing that, if not keeps you up at night, keeps you kind of thinking about it?
Yeah. Well, let's see. My big issue, I guess I'm going to blend it with AI, I guess. And this is a concern I've had for many years. And so I've seen it play out now. Probably worse than I even imagined. So I feel like people are abdicating their human judgment to technology, where we're saying, oh, we don't need humans. We'll just have robots that, fold clothes and, pick up eggs and stuff like that.
We're going to save so much money this way.
Yeah. So it's like, but you're trying to use technology to make bad decisions, and then you're trying to abdicate your responsibility as a human for that, right? So we're seeing a lot of bias in hiring algorithms. We're seeing a lot of problems with, these tools spitting out information that's not correct, things that are harmful to people. We're seeing just an over data collection, just too much data. There was a expose in the New York Times recently about cars collecting. People don't even know, like your car is collecting data that's going to these secret data brokers to get sold to insurance companies without their knowledge. And one of my friends who was a data expert, didn't know this, and his insurance went up 30%. And they're like, I didn't get any tickets, I didn't do anything, I didn't. There was nothing in my quote unquote driving record that was wrong. They were like, well, you drove to this neighborhood 5 times, or we think you took these trips, these number of trips in your car, or you did like a fast stop, a hard break,
they're tracking the actual your driving style, and they're like, you're too dangerous. Wow.
Exactly. So, I mean, to me, that's problematic. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, maybe I did a hard stop because a kid ran into my pathway, and I wouldn't hit the kid. Right.
A lot of context, a lot of possibilities for context here. That's
so
crazy.
That's my problem. That's the issue that I have with people using technology. I see, to me, AI should be more of a low level, low risk, low stakes tool as a helper to people. Yes. It shouldn't be making decisions about people.
I agree completely. Yeah, no, there's a lot of space for it, especially in terms of crunching numbers or, gathering, data from large sets and stuff like that. It's perfect for. But yeah, doing things like that and also sort of replacing sort of human judgment, and allowing sort of decision making is pretty wild. Now, can you, obviously you're a first in a forefront. Can you speak to, you support anyone else who is currently working or talking in this space who is saying especially interesting things about the confluence of AI and privacy right now that you'd like to shout out?
Yeah. Wow, there's so many different people. One person I think that you would love to chat with, his name is Stephen Lawton. Okay. So he's a writer. He's a technologist in cybersecurity. He traverses a lot of different areas, and he does a lot of writing for publications like Dark Reading. Oh yeah. Bloomberg. He's a great person to talk to because he knows so much about computers and computing. He talks, about the cyber risk and like cyber insurance. So he goes, the gambit, I think, around technology. He has a deep, deep knowledge of just tech and cyber in general. And so he's a great fan, and he's been on the show as well. He's amazing.
Well, let's talk about the show here. Like I said, I've been excited about it for a while now, and you've got almost 200 episodes on there, something like that, or over 200?
Yeah, almost 200.
Amazing.
200 in about, I don't know, 10 weeks or something.
So when did you start it? In 2018?
2019, I think. Okay. Or 2020. No, it's been 2020, I think we started.
Wow. Okay. That's an incredible pace of work there. So, tell our guests specifically about the type of people that you speak to. And I think because, you look at a list of 175, whatever, past guests, and you get a little overwhelmed. What is there, like one or two episodes that you think our listeners should start with that really give like a good idea of like what makes the show great?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's such a great question. First of all, we're really happy and proud that people really love the podcast. I think last time I checked, we've had over 170,000 downloads of the podcast. We have listeners in over 112 countries. The guests run the gamut. So they're not, I think the reason why people really like the podcast is that it's not just privacy people. Because privacy is such a horizontal issue that impacts like almost any type of company or any type of profession. I'm able to bring on people from all different areas. So I may have lawyers, I have cyber people, I have people in like, maybe biometrics, identity, anyone in the data space that wants to talk with me about privacy. We've had, people like Cameron Carey, who's part of the Brookings Institute, who's probably one of the biggest, people in the U.S. on privacy. We had Johnny Ryan, who's an advocate in Ireland. He works on a lot of those real-time bidding ad tech cases. He's been on. We've had a ton of VIPs. Probably one of the coolest episodes that I've done recently is with a guy named Jesse Taylor. Jesse Taylor, he's actually the inventor of the App Store.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So he has a story in
That's a
this
big
in the
deal.
show where he had a meeting with Steve Jobs and introduced the App Store concept to him, and then Apple bought it, and so that's how the App Store started with Apple. So his episode is amazing because he talks about his trajectory in tech, inventing the App Store. And then now he's working on identity, right?
Okay.
To try to solve a lot of identity problems. And he has like a really cool technology and a really cool way that he thinks about stuff. And so for geeky tech people who are really interested in that, you would really love that episode. It's one of my favorites.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think also people love hearing the firsts of things like that, or where things started. I think one of my past guests was the first person to hack an iPhone. I think it was like the first iPhone that came out, and they were part of the team that hacked the first iPhone. So everyone wants to hear that story for sure. But so yeah, I want to move into sort of the work portion of our show, cyber work here, because you're giving us lots of awesome knowledge here about data privacy. And I wanted to ask you specifically about the role of, say, a data privacy officer. You learned your skills over a long period of time. You were doing other work. You were doing it as kind of like a thing that excited you, and you gathered the skill set over over time. But for people who are just trying to get into this space now, do you have any recommendations for common educational requirements, qualifications, degrees, or certifications, or extracurricular learning that would sort of get you up to speed to do this type of work? Like, where would you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I would say start with self-learning. So before you spend any money on it, look into it. Look into what's being written. Follow people who are talking about things that you're interested in. There was a lot of, back in the olden times, you had to go to the library, but now you have the internet. So go on the internet. I tell people they're interested in privacy stuff, put like a Google alert for yourself for these things that you're interested in, so that you can get like a reading list every day without having to go out and search for things to see, like, is this something I'm interested in? Like, do I really want to go into this area? Also, I think especially for people who are young in their career, who aren't established and they are not known, I recommend that they try to decide, maybe get some type of certifications, and maybe a variety of them. So for privacy people, I tell people anyone who's in a data job can add privacy to their toolkit, right? So, get a certification, read a book. There's something, privacy is something that all companies have to deal with at some level. So having just a little bit of knowledge may give you that leg up where you're invited to be on a team within your company, or you can volunteer if there's no one in your company. Say, hey, I'm really interested in learning about this. And you'll be surprised how companies may invest in you. And, I don't have certifications because I think people kind of know me already. They know what I am and what I can do. But for people who are not as well known, I think those certifications help because it really demonstrates to maybe a future employer that you have taken time there to be able to get those things. But then I also, as much as I love privacy, because there's so much AI out there, I highly recommend people start to learn stuff about AI too. So whether that be, like I tell people, if you read one article, let's say you spend 10 minutes a day for 30 days to learn something new about AI, you'll probably know more than anybody around you, right? We're at the beginning of the beginning around what AI will be in the workplace. So anything that you can do to read on your own. There are a couple of different places that have free certification classes that you could take in AI, just the basics. And again, having the basics will make you better than most people. Most people don't, unless they're data geeky people like me.
We're just doing it for fun. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. You'll probably know more than other people. That'll give you a huge leg up, and it helps you differentiate yourself, I think, too. Right.
Yeah.
So you say, hey, I'm a cyber person, but then I also have this, interest in privacy, and those things can come together You could
Yes.
probably be maybe the translator between those legal and technical people within organizations. So I highly recommend that people kind of diversify a bit.
Okay.
Maybe not. I would not recommend people go into debt to be able to do this
Right.
because there are
No.
so many free resources out there. But
Yes.
just a little bit, even if you took one little class or something, that'll be better than nothing. Or if you
Yeah.
read one article a day, that'll be better than nothing. So I'll say, I highly recommend self-learning. I'm a self-taught person. I did not go to school for technology. My first computer, back in the day when computers came with books, I would read the whole book, or I would, learn as much as I could. And that's how I ended up in technology because I was interested and I could prove that I was capable of doing things. And so my journey a lot is around self-learning.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. I want to ask a little bit. You mentioned already about differentiating yourself from other people, especially at entry level position, sort of floating you to the top of the resume pile and so forth. And I like you said, I think having these kind of like niche skills, certain aspects of privacy or things in addition to your cyber skills is probably a really great way. Now, you run Debbie Reynolds Consulting. You're a consultant for companies. Is consulting something that you can someone new can do to get their job in the door? Their foot in the door. Like if you wanted to volunteer your time, say for some local organization that needs to know, what their privacy requirements are and stuff like that. Is that something that companies or places in general would be willing to entrust to like a newcomer who's trying to get their feet wet?
Yeah, I highly recommend. That's one of the top things when people contact me, like, how do I get my foot in the door? How do or for some people say, I went to this school, I got a degree, I maybe got a privacy certification, but no one will hire me because I don't have any experience, right? And I tell them, like, do you have family members that have businesses? Do you have like a local business that you can go to and say, hey, here, this privacy thing is a big deal. Maybe I volunteer or you do it like for just a nominal fee. Not a ton, maybe just help them with their website, privacy policy. All that is experience. And you can put that on your resume, right?
Absolutely.
I was the data privacy officer for blah, 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 whatever that is. And they don't need to know that you didn't get paid for it, right? It's still experience, right? That you can put on your resume. And it's something that you can do at your own pace, right? Because a lot of companies, especially the smaller companies, they don't know what to do. And they'll be happy to talk with you because a lot of them think, well, I need a lawyer to do this. And you actually don't.
Yes.
Right. Most of these, I'm not a lawyer. A lot of people who do this work are not lawyers. A lot of us are tech people, data people who have a background in governance and know what you should and shouldn't do with data. And that's really all that privacy is. Like you can do or you can't do this with data or the things you need to look at. So I highly recommend people do that. And that's been something that's been very beneficial to people who've actually taken that track. So, even let's say, for instance, you have a job, maybe you're a cyber, see if there are projects in the company around privacy that you can say, can I be a part of this project? Can I help do this? You may be able to I've had people say, well, can you, I'll be your data privacy officer, but I'll just maybe you just get a new title or something.
Yeah.
That says privacy.
Negotiate extra responsibilities and
Yeah, exactly. So there are ways to be able to get in. I would say to me, it's a wide path. So I think, I think in the future it's going to become even more important, especially as things with AI come about. Because a lot of lawyers don't, they're not experts in tech or they're not experts in data. So having people who are experts in data and also know the privacy part, I think really can elevate someone's career.
Yeah, that's really good advice too. A portion of our listenership is also people who are trying to transition into cyber related roles, maybe after having another career, maybe in their 30s or their 40s. And I think that's if you're already at a company, like a really good starting place is to, on your next job evaluation, ask for more responsibility. Say, is anyone doing data privacy for this company? Can I do that in addition to what I do? Or can I get a few things taken off my plate in order to concentrate more on this? I think there's a lot of talk about professional development, and companies want you to be, constantly growing. I think that's such a great piece of advice in terms of that.
And one thing I will add that you should really know about kind of the job market in privacy right now. So much. So when I was interested in privacy in the US, there were like hardly any lawyers doing it. Right? It was just all data people like me. Right.
Right.
But over the years, as the regulations came about, there are more lawyers now in privacy. And some people think of it as like a lawyer only job, and it isn't. So there's a lot of people like me who are in privacy, but then also, it's important to know that employers now, they're looking for more of the people who understand privacy, who understand data. All right.
Yeah.
Because at some point, unless you're a super big company, it's always changing. Once you know what the regulation is, you need to figure out how to change your operation, how you work. And so what we're seeing is more emphasis on companies trying to recruit more data people in privacy. So people who understand the data part of how companies work, because companies are struggling really with operational change, not like the regulation. So to me, it's like a very good area to put yourself in. Is a good way to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, I love that. That reminded me of something I was going to ask. Oh, this is kind of a sideways question here, but like I said, in learning about possible new career tracks, if you're just fresh out of school, or not even out of school, or didn't go to school, or whatever, you're thinking like data privacy, this is it, this is my career track, and you're all excited. Can you talk about, is there a certain aspect of the job that is that people should be warned of, in the sense that like this part of it is way more boring than you're expecting, or this part is, it makes you want to pull your hair out because, people are not going to, take your advice or whatever. Are there certain sort of undersides of data privacy that is, as long as you know them coming in, you got to be ready for them?
Oh, that's a good question. So underside, I would say if you don't like reading, like this is not like the job for you.
Yeah.
Right? There's lots of reading.
You're constantly researching, I imagine, right?
Constantly. Like I do several hours of research every day.
Wow.
And so, I mean, that's like just the only way you can keep up. And, like the AI, the European Union has the AI Act that came out. That's like 500 pages, right? And even though it's in Europe, it's going to be like the GDPR was, where it's going to be very influential for different jurisdictions. So if you learn that, then in the future, when more laws come out, you'll start to see shades of that regulation there. So reading that, understanding that will help you navigate what that future is. And that's what companies really want. I would say, really, I don't know, maybe I'm just nerdy. To me, I think that's probably the only like downside. It's just a lot of reading, and there's a lot more stuff in the press around privacy. I remember when I first, over a decade ago, maybe like 15 years ago, I put out a Google alert for privacy, and there was nothing, like not one thing for years.
Wow.
Like I want to say like almost like 6 or 7 years, it was like no articles. And then now, like, my Google alert may have 10 or 12 every day.
Yeah.
Right. So it's changed a lot. And so I think for me, being able to look, people call me a futurist because I'm good at predicting what's going to happen next. But, I'm always looking at the technology, because the technology, law follows technology. So law, you can't lead with law. Law is like backward looking.
Yeah,
So if
right.
you're thinking about the new thing, like, like when the Vision Pro headset came out, I was like, oh, wow, well, what could be the privacy issues with that? Right. And so it may not be on your desk today, but if you're thinking about those things ahead, when it comes up, then you're already in a good position to be an
Yes.
advisor or being a trusted person in that area.
Yeah. This is a little off script here, but you mentioned that you do about 5 hours of research a day. Could you tell us a little bit, like, what is your sort of your regimen? What do you where do you start each day when you're trying to like do research? It sounds like you're also the Google alert diva here as well. But like, what are some of the other like go-to sort of news sources that you check every day, or like what is your I jump from here to here to here to here each day? Do you have like a routine at all?
Yeah. I have an app that I use called Flipboard, and
Oh yeah.
Flipboard allows you to collect articles and stuff, and
Yep.
it makes it, you can make it in a magazine. So I have a research magazine, and every time I see something that I think is of interest, I have like a research file that I save it to. And then every night for a couple of hours, I go through my research file and I just read through stuff. And
Got it.
so, and of course, it was like bigger things. Another thing I do, like these bigger laws, sometimes I use a app called Speechify, where I have it read it to me. So I can be like washing
Oh,
dishes or doing something. And
nice.
so I'm not reading, I'm just listening,
Taking it
doing
in.
different things, just taking it in and stuff like that. So those are
Yep.
two things that help me a lot. And so I do videos every week. I've actually been
Yep.
doing those for over 5 years. So I do one video a
Oh,
week that I release. And so uh, because what I found that it was too hard to start and stop research. So that's why I
yeah.
always do it.
Yeah. No.
I
Yeah.
just continue
That's
to do it. And then when people call me, they're like, oh, you need to look at your notes. I'm like, no, I'm ready.
Yeah, for those of us with I have ADHD and I know other people as well, but like sometimes the prospect of like, okay, learn all the privacy now feels like, that old like game show thing where you're in like a wind tunnel and there's dollars flying everywhere and you're just constantly trying to grab. So I think that's a really good advice, especially the Flipboard thing and sort of making the magazines. Because again, I think if you're like, well, I'm grabbing this, but when am I going to get to it? But if you sort of like slap it all together and say, okay, 2 hours a night, I'm just going to go through this, and you already have this structured thing that you're going to read. I think that's a really good way to kind of like get your head around what all this is, because there's a million options and there's a billion ways to do it right and wrong and so forth. So yeah, that's great advice. Now I want to ask one more thing regarding like careers and stuff. Are there particular skills gaps among people trying to get hired in data privacy positions you see on a regular basis that you wish were more common? Like, are there things that people are like, I'm a data privacy person. You're like, well, why aren't you doing this? Or I wish you did more of this. I wish you had more of this skill. Is there anything like that people should be aware of?
That's a great question. I would say, and you probably wouldn't think this was typical, but the gap that I see the most are technology people who don't know how to talk in ways that anybody can understand, and legal people who also have the same problem.
Yeah.
So, we have like legal people who want to do alphabet soup and acronyms and shorthand
Right.
and stuff. And then the
Mhm.
tech people have their own acronyms and shorthand. And so the problem is, in a privacy role, you have to be able to communicate across all levels of the organization and with anybody. So if you're saying some acronym soup thing, people aren't going to pay any attention to you. They are going to
Yep.
listen to what you have to say. So to me, that gap really is understanding how to be a great communicator, right?
Mhm.
So the person that you're talking to, like, let's say you're being asked to brief the CEO of a company about a particular issue. And this happened to me before, where I talk with maybe the legal people, like, hey, you all need to do this. And then I talk to the technical people, hey, and they're like, well, I need you to explain it to the CEO. So I know that the CEO doesn't understand the legal. He doesn't understand tech stuff in the same way. So I have to be able to communicate that to him differently. Or even people when I'm doing training, like for a whole organization. Like I've done trainings for like Coca-Cola, Johnson Johnson, like all types of companies, right? And so you have to make it easy enough for anyone, regardless of where they are in the organization, to be able to understand what you're trying to say. And so that's a skill just in general that I think is going to be highly relevant in the future, not just for privacy, but all jobs. AI is very complex, right? And so if you can break down what AI systems are doing in an easy way, you can elevate yourself in your organization, because very few people have honed those skills. It's so funny because even when I talked to when I was asked to talk on PBS about privacy, they don't tell you what they're going to ask you. They just put you on TV and they start asking you questions. But I had to think in my head. I kind of stopped for a second. I thought, wait a minute, I have to be able to explain this to someone's grandmother. Or someone who's 10, so I can't explain it in a way that a legal person or a technical person. So I have to break it down as easily, as simply as possible. And so that's a skill that I think will help anybody in any type of career. So if you're a good communicator, you can communicate not in legalese or not in technical jargon, you'll go far in any career that you want to go into.
I completely agree. Now, you mentioned obviously the sort of alphabet soup and the sort of talking past each other between legal and tech and so forth. Is it ever a case where like the privacy person is asking the company to make difficult changes? And I imagine there's got to be some element of like persuasion involved, right, as well, where you're saying like, look, I know you really don't want to put in this extra money to or lose this data that we were otherwise going to harvest this way, that way, and the other way or whatever. So I imagine you're also having to sort of like patiently explain like, no, we don't get to do that. Is that the case as well? Or is that someone else's job?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I guess it's the art of saying no in a way. You're like, oh, you can't do this or you shouldn't do this. Right. But, when you're an advisor, I say consultant, but, advisor interchangeably, and it may be frustrating where you say, hey, here's the law here. This is what you're doing. This is what we recommend that you do. But, companies, even though privacy is important, it's not the only consideration. And so companies have to make their own choices, but you want to make sure that they're making an educated decision, right? So you don't want them to make a decision because they don't know something. You want to be able to say, hey, here's the lay of the land. This is what I think, here would be my advice for what you do. But then you have to decide as an organization, what is your culture? What is your standard? What are you going to do? Maybe you're somebody like Facebook. You're like, well, we don't care because we're going to do what we want and we're going to pay $1 billion and that's fine. That's their choice, right? You may not like that, but, and I feel like sometimes I see on LinkedIn, people like slamming people who work for certain companies, like, oh, I can't believe your company does this. It's like, you just have one job, right? So you're not the CEO. You don't get to pick and choose what companies do. All you can do is tell them, like, this is what is going on. This is what our obligations are. This is what I think you should do. This is how, and this is where, to me, the cyber and data people come in. How do you do it?
Yes.
So it's one thing to say, oh, okay, you need to comply with this law. Okay, well, how do you do that? Yeah, I don't know. Like, how do I change the way that we operate to be able to get in line with this? So that's the gap.
You have to sort of show the entire pathway there then. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, it's easier to say, okay, this law came out and you have to comply with it. But then how do companies change? And so that's the problem that they're having. That's why they need data people, because they need to know how operationally on a hands-on basis, what do you need to do to change your behavior in the organization?
Yeah, awesome. And I think that's probably another one of those sort of underside things worth noting is like you can make recommendations to your company and I also have to understand that they might not take all of your advice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the advisory that you do. Yeah,
I can only tell you what you need to do. I can't put it into your hand and make you do it.
That's right.
So this has been an amazing conversation. We're bumping up against an hour here. I would love to have you back on if you're available to talk Internet of Things and especially AI and sort of drill into those topics better. But I really enjoyed getting your insights on sort of career related questions around data privacy. But before I let you go, Debbie, can I ask, What's the best piece of career advice you ever received, whether it was from a mentor or a teacher or a colleague or just something you learned along the way?
Oh, wow. I think probably the best career advice I received maybe from my parents. So my parents were very into education. They were very much into learning, and they never put limits on what we could do or what we can learn, right? And so I would say don't put limits on yourself. Don't, I learned not to put myself in a box because I don't fit in a box, right? I have a lot of different interests. And so I'm lucky that I have a company where I can exercise all the things that I'm interested in, even though they may not even seem related, right? Like one of my early jobs when I said I was doing desktop publishing, like I do a lot of graphics. I have a media company as well. So I do a lot of graphic design for that. I mean, that's just because that's something that I've done forever, and that's kind of a fun artsy thing. Gets me out of the the privacy wonky world, and I can kind of do more creative stuff.
Fun.
But I would say for people, don't put yourself in a box, and you'd be surprised how much maybe skills that you have in different areas may come together at some point.
Yeah, fabulous advice. Thank you. So I'm going to let you go here, but one last question. If our listeners want to learn more about you, Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva podcast, or the other 150 things you got going on, where should they look for you online?
Yeah, well, people can always connect with me on LinkedIn. You just type in Data Diva, Debbie Reynolds, and connect with me. Happy to. Or they can look at my website, DebbieReynoldsConsulting.com. I have all my videos and newsletters and events and everything on the website.
Yeah, and don't forget to check out the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast. I got mine on my regular podcatcher and highly recommend it. So, well, this has been great. Debbie, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed learning from you.
Thank you so much. I love the show. I love your flow. Very good flow of the show. Very good.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. And to everyone out there, I'd like to thank you, everyone who's watching and listening and writing into the podcast with feedback. As usual, if you have any topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like to see on the show, drop them in the comments. We've been adjusting our content accordingly, so you are getting heard. Before I go, I don't want to forget to have you check infosecinstitute.com/free, where you can get a whole bunch of free and exclusive stuff for Cyberwork listeners. This includes our security awareness training series, Work Bites, a smartly scripted and hilariously acted set of videos in which a very strange office staffed by a pirate, a zombie, an alien, a fairy princess, a vampire, and others navigate their way through age-old struggles of yore, whether it's not clicking on the treasure map someone just emailed you, making sure your nocturnal vampiric accounting work is at the hotel is VPN secured, or realizing that even if you have a face as recognizable as the office's terrifying IT guy, Bone Slicer, you still can't buzz you in without your key card. So go to the site, check out the trailer. I love it. Infosecinstitute.com/free is still the best place to go for your free cybersecurity talent development ebook. You'll find our in-depth training plans and strategies for the 12 most common security roles, including SOC analyst, penetration tester, cloud security engineer, information risk analyst, privacy manager, secure coder, ICS professional, and more. One more time, that is infosecinstitute.com/free. And yes, the link is always in the description below. One last time, thank you so much to Debbie Reynolds, and thank you all for watching and listening. Until next week, this is Chris Senko signing off, saying happy learning.